Welcome to Andy and Ari On3, presented by Wendy's. It is big game week. We're going big game hunting. Ari and I headed to Ann Arbor for Michigan and Texas on Saturday. And Ari, we're going to preview that game. But first, we have something new to talk about. The first SEC availability report has been released. And so all these leagues, because of how much gambling has changed over the last few years, they're all going to do NFL-style availability reports. We know the Big Ten's doing them. The SEC, they're doing them for conference games. So we have the first one because we have the first SEC conference game this weekend between South Carolina and Kentucky. And here you go. You've got exactly out, doubtful, questionable, probable. Big long list for Kentucky. A lot of out for Kentucky. Chip Trainum, obviously, out. Demi Sumo. I'm gonna have to get this name right eventually. Demi Sumo. I keep wanting to say Demi Sumo Kabong, but that's not it. That would be an awesome nickname for him. Kongbe. Demi Sumo Kongbe will be carrying the load on the ground for the Wildcats, along with probably some Brock Vandegrift. But all right, Ari, you've placed a bet or two in your lifetime. Do we think these are going to make a? Yeah. Do we think these are going to make a difference?
I mean, they're certainly helpful. You know, when it would have been really, really helpful, Andy, was during COVID, the era of which half a team could get ruled out 10 minutes before kickoff and nobody had any idea that was going on. That was the hardest season to place a wager. You know, I do think that they will. The thing that I am wondering, and I'm assuming is going to happen soon, is like once a person is questionable, like you can start playing games with that, because that word doesn't really give you any information, right? It's like we're not sure if he's going to play. Will he play? Will he not play? We'll figure it out. It kind of puts you back in the same position, but it is good to see that people are on it, so you have an idea of like, okay, would I still place this bet if this person doesn't go? Or do I really like this because they're probable now? Like, you know, anything that acknowledges injuries in any way, I think is helpful, because college football has a long-standing history of gamesmanship. Mm-hmm. And, you know, coaches might know that a player isn't playing or is unavailable on Monday, and you don't hear about it till 10 minutes before kickoff. Like, that happened all the time. So this is certainly something that I think is necessary, given how big of a business gambling has become in this sport, but also just transparency in general. Like, my number one thing with college football, that's always like, you know, you always talk about how crazy, stupid, and funny the sport is. Like, the paranoia that exists in these coaches' rooms is just off the charts. I was once doing a story, and I won't tell you who it was or which program it was, but I was at an SEC program doing a recruiting story, and their recruiting coordinator was talking about how they felt like they got their office bugged, and they had to like they had like debuggers that go through to make sure that there were no listening devices in their office. Like, this is the world we live in. Even though 99% of it is imaginary, I do think that like any sort of transparency that can help give fans more information, even if it's not from a gambling standpoint, just to understand where your team is or the best players on your team are, I think is going to be a positive, a net gain for the sport.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen in the past where you've had a starting quarterback who has been out all week. Teams known he's been out all week, but nobody's allowed to watch practice. Nobody had any clue. He doesn't show up, and the coach's like, yeah, he was hurt. Oh, well.
Yeah.
Like, so,
I'm sure there's been a lot of bets lost because of that, you know?
Yeah.
Because it wasn't like just small-time players. Like, it's like, oh, your best running back hasn't been practicing all week? Now, as beat reporters have gotten better over the years, Andy, it's harder to keep that secret.
Right.
In the information era, if somebody's walking around campus in a walking boot, like, that's on Twitter in 30 seconds. But it does happen still, or has happened in the recent past, and this will be better.
So let's talk about this Kentucky-South Carolina game. Before we get into Texas and Michigan, I do want to talk about Kentucky-South Carolina, because this is an intriguing game. South Carolina has won 2 in a row against Kentucky. There has been a lot of back and forth between Mark Stoops and Shane Beamer, maybe not directly, but certainly across one another's bows. Last year, Mark Stoops said something before the game. Shane Beamer produced a video after the game. Mark Stoops probably needs to win this game headed into the Georgia game, but Shane Beamer needs to win this game, Ari, because they went 5-7 last year. So This is very, very intriguing.
Yeah, I do think that Kentucky has reached the peak or the ceiling of what the program could be. And I don't know if that's insulting or not, but being a 10-point favorite against a team, that's as talented as South Carolina in the second week of the season, I think is an indication of like when you just said they need to win. When has Kentucky ever needed to win a game? Like that to me is just a testament of what Mark Stoops has been able to accomplish there. Now, I think that they will win the game, and I think that we always have these seasons where Kentucky comes out and starts 4 or 5-0, and then they end up playing Georgia, and then you realize the great divide that's probably unovercomable, if that's a word.
Yeah.
That's kind of waiting around the corner here for Kentucky, but I do think that they've got a very, very good team with some really important pieces and one of the best players in college football.
So you and I, when we were together before, I always said that Kentucky's the best job in college football because they will build you a statue if you can win 8 games a year. They will pay you like the other guys in the SEC who are expected to win national championships. And all you have to do is occasionally win 9 or 10 and then just, be reasonably okay every year. I think that's changed. I don't think it's the best job in America anymore because of something Mark Stoops did. I think he's made it not the best job in America by sort of thumbing his nose at the fact that he has the best job in America. By going after the Texas A&M job last year, that probably made it where the first time he has one of these losses where the Kentucky fans are like, oh no, it's going to be 8-4 again. Now they're going to turn on him because before he was the guy who brought them there. He was one of them. He's got a bourbon company. But now they know. He was like, oh, I think I've hit the ceiling here. I'm going to go for this Texas A&M job. The Texas A&M trustees revolted. They're like, now we're not going to guarantee Mark Stoops the same amount we guarantee Jimbo Fisher. So we're going to go for somebody else. It's unbelievable. Single T in the chat. You sort of ruined the Kentucky job, though. Everybody knows that now. So it's my fault?
What's interesting is we did say that it's the best job in America because of the success to failure ratio and what would happen. And I understand that fan temperament has changed to a certain degree. I agree with what you just said. But I think the real question here is what would have to happen for Kentucky to fire him? Like, I think that fans
nothing.
No, they can't.
They'd owe him so much.
So what I'm saying, so to me, that's why it hasn't changed, because he could exist in Lexington for a very long time, having, below average seasons. And I'm talking 4 or 5 win seasons for Kentucky, which used to be better than the norm, and still be completely fine. I think that when you start getting into tough jobs, it's the ones where you get fired very quickly for results that are probably more in line with where your program is. Like that's like from best to worst jobs in America. Like that's why I thought Tennessee was one of the worst jobs in America before, because they anticipated or wanted you to win 10, 11, 12 games in year 2. And where the program was at before Josh Heupel got there, I wasn't necessarily sure that was possible. And talk about the fans and the pressure cooker. Like that would be the hardest job to me in America, or one of them. It stands out to me. Kentucky, he can go to bed in his beautiful $3 million home in his, goose down situation in his bed and never have to fret about whether or not he's going to have a job when he wakes up in the morning.
Surrounded by bottles from his own distillery. Yes.
And honestly, who cares like what the people in rural Kentucky say from their basement anyway, right? Like that's
Mark Stoops.
That's a joke, guys. Don't
say that.
I'm joking. I'm joking.
Yeah.
But seriously, like listen, we all know that being a college football coach, getting things thrown in your face from fans or being a topic on Twitter and things that people say is part of the job. On the list of things that would make me change my mind, I think fan sentiment is probably at the bottom of that list. I think that the one thing that I would say that would make me change my mind, and this is a different way to look at it, Andy, is it takes a certain type of person to become comfortable at the ceiling. So like Mark Stoops can exist at Kentucky for the next 20 years and go 8-4 and be fine and be a coach that's revered and loved there. But I think that the coach's mentality, is competitive. And when you have conquered something, their number one thing that they're told to do, just with their sense and their inherent nature, is to go accomplish something bigger and better. So the Kentucky job would be the best job in the world for somebody who has a temperament that wants to just revel in the ceiling for 20 years, even though the ceiling isn't championships. But I think that Mark Stoops is already proven that he's not that type of person. So from that standpoint, money and security at a place that, you've already achieved everything that you're going to achieve is great. But for the coach's mentality, that's not necessarily, I think, the legacy or the place that they would want to exist for a few more decades. So from that standpoint, I think that it's so good that it's boring, which makes it not as good. Does that make sense?
Yep. So Single T, who's blaming me for this, by the way, it does feel like in the last 4 years, since you started saying it's the best job, the feeling of 8-4 has changed from being a success to being just okay. They're good being 8-4, but kind of wanting more. I think that's natural for fan bases. I always talk about how South Carolina had that period with Steve Spurrier where they won 11 games 3 years in a row. They beat Clemson 5 years in a row. And that had never happened in the history of the program before. And suddenly people started thinking that was a birthright. And it's not. And so you
and what
do
happens
have to
a lot
kind
too, Andy, is that, sorry, not to talk over you. I've been doing that a lot. I got to work on it. But he is a coach who has figured out a plan, executed that plan so well that it's gotten to this point. But at the same time, if you look at their schedule this year, they're playing Georgia, they're playing on the road at Ole Miss, they're playing at Florida. Say what you want about that game. They've got a much better Auburn team at home. Then they're at Tennessee, at Texas, and host Louisville. What are we supposed to do with that? You know what I mean? It's 8-4 on that schedule with the Kentucky team that he's built, I think, is a successful season. So I think every year that changes, but I think that there is a yearning nature. And Mark Stoops is somebody that I covered when I was in college. He was the defensive coordinator at Arizona back in the 2005 to 9 range. And he was there. I've known him now for 20 years. And I think that he has it in him where he wants to. I think it's the same thing that Brian Kelly experienced at Notre Dame to a more closer extent. Notre Dame made the playoff and was in games against Alabama. But I think Brian Kelly is at LSU because he wanted to win national championships, because he realized the ceiling at his program, at least the way he ran it, had already reached it there. So I think that Mark Stoops has been existing at Kentucky ceiling for longer than Brian Kelly was existing at Notre Dame's. And at a certain point, your heart yearns for more.
Yep. I'm looking in the chat and everybody is dead certain that Kentucky's going to win this game. I am not. That is a big number. That 9.5. I am not not sure Kentucky's going to cover or win. So this is a must watch. I'm telling you right now. But the other must watch in the afternoon is the early game. The one we're going to be at in Ann Arbor, Texas and Michigan. So this is your official Texas-Michigan preview presented by Prize Picks. We got to talk about this game, Ari. It is it's a situation where Michigan is favored. Texas is favored. Michigan, we don't exactly know what their offense is. We've seen it once against Fresno State. We saw Davis Warren. And Texas, we know what they are. It's the same offense, same quarterback, different receivers, but they've just reloaded. You're bringing Ryan Wingo as a superstar freshman. They bring in Isaiah Bond. They've got everything they need to move the ball. We wonder up the middle of their defense, how are they going to do against a Michigan team that likes to run the ball and likes to get after you? But I think it's very easy to just say, well, I think Texas is going to be too explosive for Michigan. So I actually went back and watched all of Davis Warren's snaps, all his dropbacks from the Fresno State game. And it was interesting when I came. First of all, Colston Loveland is their most dynamic target. It's not close. They tried to get some other guys involved, try to do some things where they got, Samaj Morgan maybe got him the ball in stride so he can try to get some yak yards. But Colston Loveland is the guy who can get open every time. So I'm going to since this is a Prize Picks preview, I'm going to tell you right now, Colston Loveland's Prize Picks projection for this game is 41.5 receiving yards.
Mm-hmm.
If Michigan has any chance at all, it's going to be more than that and way more than that because he is Davis Warren's security blanket. He's the one who can get open, and I don't care how good the Texas defense is. He can get open against them. So that's the one. And for those of you who don't know, Prize Picks, best daily fantasy game in America. You download the app, you use the code Staples, play $5, you get $50 instantly, win or lose, and you pick squares. And so you pick as few as 2 squares. You can pick as many as 5 squares. The more you pick, the higher the potential payout. I'm telling you right now that if you think Michigan's going to win this game, then you go more than on Colston Loveland 41.5 because he is going to have to do that. And I think you probably have to go more than Davis Warren. I believe it's 150.5. I think you're going to have to go more than that too. The question is, can they do that against Texas's defense?
I mean, when I looked at the numbers, Andy, the Loveland number was way, way, way lower than I would have ever. Like, if you had to, like we play that game, it's like pick the line, make the line. When we're talking about game spreads, but when you're talking about Prize Picks, like make the number. Didn't he have like 90 receiving yards and 8 or 9 receptions last week? Like, he is their number one target. So in a game like this at home, especially where we're in a situation where, I mean, at least I am worried about the type of quarterback play we're going to get from Michigan as a whole this year, the security blanket getting to 50 yards, which would be be more than that number, much more, seems to be kind of like a layup to me.
Yeah, because even if they lose this game, I see him going more than 41.5 receiving yards because clearly he is Davis Warren's favorite target. I mean, I don't need a lot of dropbacks. I don't need to watch much to know that. Now, my question to you is, how does Michigan win this game? And I will say, from watching those dropbacks, just watching their pass game, they're better when they come out of those condensed formations. When they're in those formations where you are dead certain they're going to run the ball and they're sneaking Loveland out and they've got the receivers kind of bunched in there and they come, spreading out as after the play begins. I think they're better doing that than going 4 wide or 5 wide. Like when they go 4 wide, I feel like they're pretty vulnerable because I don't think they have a lot of receivers that scare you. Like when Texas goes 4 wide, that's scary as hell.
Right.
I don't feel that way about Michigan. I feel like Michigan's got to run the ball well with Mullings and Donovan Edwards, and then use those formations that they're having success with in the run game to then pass out of those. Yeah.
So, being here in Texas, I am surrounded by a lot of Texas fans that are kind of in my circle now. People from daycare, people that work with my wife, some of the friends that I have are big Texas guys. And I think the general sentiment is that Texas is going to not just win this game, but win by 2 or 3 scores. That's what people are expecting. And the thing that I say back to them is, 1, I just got done underestimating Michigan for an entire season that ended up culminating in a national championship. And then 2, Andy, is if you were to do a draft of the best overall players in this game, I think that there is a real case to be made, and maybe this is too far, but the top 3 players might be too far, would be on Michigan's defense, but certainly the top 2 players in the game overall are on Michigan's defense. So when you ask me, how is Michigan going?
We sure Kelvin Banks wouldn't be your number 2 pick behind Will Johnson? Are we sure about that? You're talking about Mason Graham and Kelvin Banks. It's a tough one.
Let's line them up at midfield and let them fight for it. I don't know. Kelvin Banks would probably be 2 or 3, depending on, because Will Johnson, I think we can both agree is clear and above number 1. Right.
He would be number 1. But yeah, my question is it Kelvin Banks, the left tackle for Texas, or one of the 2 D tackles for Michigan, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant? Like the crazy thing about this is, all of these humans that we've just mentioned could be picked in the top 10 of the NFL draft next year if things go a certain way this season.
And the point really, like whether or not you want to say Banks is 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever, the point is that Michigan, in my opinion, probably has 3 of the 4, or does have 3 of the 4 best players on the field, and 3 of them are on defense. So how does Michigan win the game? By stopping the run, especially considering the fact that we know that Texas lost an important piece of their backfield in the preseason, and just mucking the game up. Like if this game goes over, I think that Michigan will have lost by 2 scores. But if this game is under and Michigan creates some extra possessions, is able to run the football, gets Loveland involved, I part of me in my gut feels like Texas should win by 1 million, but my gut's telling me that Michigan is still a very, very good football team and is able to keep, at least at home in their first game since winning a national championship, a game against a program that has, historically played in close games that shouldn't be close, pretty close. So my brain's telling me Texas by 10, but there's just something in my gut that's saying that Michigan's going to be able to keep this game close.
Well, and if you're going on the prize picks course and you're looking at the Texas receivers, I have a hard time deciding who I would go with.
It's hard.
Because last week they had 4 guys with over 50 receiving yards: Ryan Wingo, Isaiah Bond, Jonte Cook, and Matthew Golden. Matthew Golden caught 2 touchdown passes. Isaiah Bond caught 1. Ryan Wingo led them in receiving yardage. He's the freshman who may be the best of this bunch when all is said and done. And so I don't know who to pick. And then Scott in the chat has an interesting comment. So the unknown, we still don't know what Michigan has. Texas won in a flashy way last week. Michigan played their cards close. I'm going to push back on that. I do think Michigan did play their cards close. I think Michigan probably was very vanilla against Fresno State, was not trying to show too much. But I will argue that Texas also was not trying to show too much against Colorado State. They didn't win in a flashy way. They're just that much better than Colorado State. They didn't do anything exotic.
So here's the thing that I want to ask you, Andy. You're probably more, having played the game, technical with X's and O's and understanding the actual sports intricacies. Will Johnson is the best corner in college football. There's no question about it. Just watching him play is awe-inspiring. But I think Texas probably has the receiving core a year after having a receiving core that could probably most stack up with what Ohio State puts on the field every Saturday, right? So if you have one corner that is as good as Will Johnson, but you have Jonte Cook and Bond and all these guys, do you wonder how much a person like Johnson can be neutralized when he can only cover one person? And do you fear that Michigan won't be able to stop Texas through the air? Because that is the one thing that I keep going to in my brain of this game could be ugly for Michigan because they might just be able to throw all over them.
So that is my fear, because when you have a team that has one really great receiver and then you have one really great corner, you just have that corner follow him all over the field.
Right.
You can't pick just one with Texas. So basically, you're probably leaving Will Johnson on one side. Now, there is an advantage to that where that side is essentially taken away from the offense. The offense is probably not even going to look there. So it allows the rest of the defense to concentrate on a smaller portion of the field. And that is helpful. Now, what Michigan's going to have to do, and the question here, remember we talked about those 2 interior guys on the defensive line, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant. Both of them are awesome. Also, the edge guys, Josiah Stewart, Derek Moore, those guys, they've got to get after Quinn Ewers. What I think is interesting, because I remember when Michigan hired Wink Martindale as a defensive coordinator, remember he was in the NFL for a long time Ravens defensive coordinator, and then he was the Giants defensive coordinator recently. But at the Ravens, he's the one who trained Mike McDonald, who was Michigan's D coordinator. He's now the Seahawks head coach, and Jesse Minter, who was last year's Michigan D coordinator. And I said, it's like losing Eminem and 50 Cent and hiring Dr. Dre, basically. But there is a difference schematically between Wink Martindale and those 2 pupils of Wink Martindale's. Wink Martindale will heat you up a lot more. He will blitz a lot more. And that, I'm not saying that is necessarily a positive. I'm saying he will take more risks. And so it's really on Quinn Ewers to handle those risks and make Michigan pay when they gamble. If Quinn Ewers does get heated up, if he gets sacked, if he gets pressured and throws a pick or two, then Wink Martindale's plan is working. But it really will be up to how Quinn Ewers handles that.
Andy, do you ever dream about college football?
Always.
Okay, I had a dream, but like college football analysis, because I had a dream last night about this game, and I woke up, and maybe it was a revelation. I don't know what that means. But I wrote a column over the weekend saying we should have seen, or kind of saw, what happened to Florida State coming, right? Like, and you read it, you helped me, craft it. Where are we with Michigan, a team that has not recruited at a historically high level? Now, they're much better, I think, than Florida State has been the last 4 years. Florida State was in the 20s by and large, and I think Michigan's more in the 10s. So that's better. But when we are talking about expectation, they are facing a juggernaut recruiting team that has accentuated their talent through the portal. Like Isaiah Bond is on their team, for instance. They didn't need to go get him.
The guy who won the Iron Bowl last year for Alabama.
Yeah, is on their team, despite the fact that they already have elite level recruits and other players at that position to replace A.D. Mitchell and Xavier Worthy. Could Saturday's game be the first sign of like, hey, Michigan won the national championship. They did something incredible that nobody expected, and they did a good job developing their 5-star players and hitting the portal last year. But from the way I used to understand college football, you had to recruit at a certain level to be very good year over year. So let me ask you this, trying to see it first before writing about it after, because this is a podcast and we're supposed to talk things through.
Yeah.
Why do we think that Michigan will be good enough to potentially win the Big Ten this year when they have not recruited at that level? They lost 80% of their roster and have an unknown at the quarterback position and a first-year head coach. Like, there's a lot there where, like, if we were analyzing this in 2018, where you're like, they're cooked. You know what I mean? And granted, I do know that Michigan does have those 3 studs on defense. They have Donovan Edwards on offense. I know they have Colston Loveland at tight end. I know they've got pieces. And I'm not saying they're going to be Florida State bad by any stretch of the imagination. Just don't go make that up in your imagination and tweet at me about it, because that's not what I'm saying. But should we be erring on the side of caution here when it comes to this Michigan team?
Okay, so here's the thing. I think Alabama and Georgia have spoiled us in terms of being able to reload so well after national championships. And we just assume that anybody who wins a national championship is going to be as talented the next year as they were the year before. That's not usually how it happens. Usually, for 100 years, a team would win a national championship because it had a special group of players. They got older at the same time, more experienced at the same time, and they had a critical mass of veteran talent in a certain year. And then those guys left, and then they built it back up. That doesn't mean they fell off the table, but it means they usually took a little step back after winning the national title. This feels more traditional like that. That said, potentially 3 first-round draft picks on this Michigan defense next year in next year's draft. Like, there may be some guys that are first-rounders in future year drafts, but 3 potentially in next year's draft. Still very meaningful. Very meaningful. But yeah, the offense is a big question mark. The offensive line is a big question mark. Like Fresno State game, they had a situation where there was a stunt in the middle. The right guard clearly thought he had help from the center, but the center was helping the left guard. And they basically let a defensive tackle walk through and sack Davis Warren. Like, that communication stuff doesn't happen when you've been playing together a long time. Like, you know what the other guys are doing. So that's the sort of thing that will happen as they rebuild, reload. And that's the risk you take. So this game is going to be so much fun. I cannot wait. Prize Picks Lots of ways to play with this game. Download that app, play $5, get $50 instantly. Also, if you want a free square, every week this month, they're giving you Caleb Williams because PrizePicks has all the sports. So they have NFL, college football, WNBA, darts, esports, doesn't matter. Power slap. So they're giving you Caleb Williams every week this month. So if you pick the Caleb Williams square and he throws for 1 yard in the Bears game, then you're going to win that square. So just remember, they're helping you out with one. Then you only got to figure out one more if you want to go home a winner. So download the PrizePicks app, play 5, get 50 instantly with the code STAPLES. All right, Ari, it is time for Dear Andy. And we got some great questions, but I actually we got a good one in the chat. So I'm going to throw this one out here first.
Okay.
It's from John Paul Bacon. Why is Oregon rated so much higher than the other former Pac-12 teams when Washington beat them in 3 straight games in the last 2 years? And John Paul has another question about Washington up here, so I can tell where he's going with this. So we're going to ignore USC, which we think is better, and explain Washington. I don't know that John Paul has followed Washington that much since the national championship game. It's not the same team. They have 2 starters back, a new coach. They beat Oregon twice last year, but they in no way resemble the team that beat Oregon twice last year. It's a completely new team. I think Jed Fish understands it's a bit of a rebuild in this situation. Doesn't mean they're going to be terrible, but no one is expecting them to compete in the Big Ten, including probably everybody in the building.
So the one thing that I've learned in 5 days working at On3 is that they have done such a good job with the graphics and the promotion of the show that we're reaching more people just naturally than I used to in previous jobs, which exposes me to a lot more comments and a lot more thoughts from people that otherwise might not have seen the work that I was doing, which is great, but also terrifying. The thing that I don't understand about people is that if you read the question you just put up in the screen here, they're saying, why is Oregon rated higher when they've lost in the past? The past isn't what we're looking to accomplish here, guys. Rankings are about projecting the future. They're not about overanalyzing the past. And I understand that the past at times can help you understand and is revelatory for what happens in the future. But when I look at Oregon and what they have on their roster and what they brought back and what they brought in, I'm not thinking about Washington. I'm not thinking about USC. I'm thinking about Oregon and what I think that this team has assembled and what they can accomplish. And this happened last year when I thought Texas would go to the playoff. Texas had 20 years of evidence that they were going to blow it somehow. But it's not my job to try to predict or think, well, they always blew it before, so they're going to blow it now. It's to look at the roster. It's to look at the coach and the schedule and to come to a reasonable expectation for what this team can accomplish. And Oregon had a really tough game against Idaho. The fact that they played a 4-quarter game, I remember telling you they were in the 4th quarter in a 1-possession game when you were getting the studio ready in your house, Andy, and you're like, what? I can't explain why that happened. I don't know if that's going to be a preview of what we're going to get out of this Oregon team, or if it was just a really bad opener. But what I do know is what they've done in the offseason with the assembly of this roster and a coach that I think is on the verge of breaking out and becoming one of the stars of this sport. I think that they're appropriately ranked at 5. And guess what? If they aren't, it's going to happen to come out very soon, and that'll be fixed. So, just so you know, and I don't know how you are, Andy, when I am ranking teams, I spend 0 minutes considering what happened last year or 5 years ago or 10 years ago. 0.
Yeah, I think you're right. One more from Dalton, and I'm going to answer it quick because we just talked a bunch about Michigan. But what proof is there that Sharon Moore is a better coach? Those games last year weren't game plans he implemented. Harbaugh did that. Moore just stood on the sideline at game time. He was calling the plays while managing, do we go for it on 4th down? How do we call these plays? How do we string these together? He made adjustments in the Penn State game that won them the game. He made 4th down calls in the Ohio State game that won them the game. Anybody who thinks Sharon Moore just stood on the sideline has no clue how football actually works. So sorry, Dalton. That was a really stupid question. But here comes a very smart question from our friend Tim. Hi, Andy. I'm a huge fan. You and Ari, the best college football podcast, and I am very excited that you're back together. I have two questions. We'll start with the first one, Ari. The last three big games in which a Big Ten team has played an SEC team, Alabama, Michigan, Texas, Washington, LSU, USC, the Big Ten team has won. Is that indicative of the Big Ten moving closer to the SEC, or is that just a blip? Okay. Well, thank you, first of all, for the kind words, Tim.
Good question.
But we're cherry picking a little bit here because, one, Texas and Washington were not SEC and Big Ten teams when they played, but I will give you that one because you and I both know if Texas had won the Sugar Bowl, the SEC office would have absolutely claimed that, like 100%. So I will give you that one. But are we pretending that the Ole Miss Penn State Peach Bowl and the Ohio State Missouri Cotton Bowl didn't happen? Because they happened, and the SEC teams were quite a bit better in those games.
Well, let me ask you this, Andy. How far of a gap do you think there actually is at this moment?
Well, and I have some numbers for you because I think it's somewhat instructive. I am giving the Big Ten the Texas Washington game. So I started on January 1st, 2015, which I believe you covered a game of great import between a Big Ten and SEC team that day. That's the day that Alabama played Ohio State in the Sugar Bowl, and Zeke blasted through the Alabama defense, and Ohio State won. So since that day, regular season and postseason, the Big Ten is 20-27 against the SEC. So it's not super lopsided, but the times they've met when it really matters. So between that Ohio State win against Alabama in that Sugar Bowl and the Michigan win against Alabama in the Rose Bowl earlier this year, the Big Ten was 0-4 in college football playoff games against the SEC, and we got outscored 166-76. And I'm not giving the SEC Alabama over Washington in that case. I'm leaving Washington in the Pac-12 for that. So those were the games that it was being judged on. So the fact that Michigan was able to overcome that, beat Alabama, that's huge. The fact that USC beat LSU, also huge. I do think at the top, the Big Ten and the SEC are not all that different. I think the SEC is deeper.
I think that the SEC has more programs that are consistently good. I think that the Big Ten has a lot of programs at the top that can be very good, but haven't been. Like, I think that what really hinges the Big Ten's chances in this scenario is that they have a program emerge that can match Ohio State or be in Ohio State's realm from a year to year to year to year basis, which I think is going to bleed well into the next question. But like USC is kind of in a transition period right now. Penn State has been very good traditionally, but they have not been great traditionally. Michigan just won the national title and is amazing and beat Alabama on the way. But is that a one-year thing, or is Michigan going to have a sustained run of success for 10 years where they can beat Ohio State and compete for a national championship 8 out of those 10 years? That remains to be seen. I think that, the SEC has a bigger, probably financial commitment in the NIL space when you're talking about teams 4 through 8 than the Big Ten does, which is where I think the difference lies. Mm-hmm. But if Ohio State's the only program in the Big Ten that has a chance or is expected to compete for a national championship before the season every single year, then the Big Ten does not compare. We need other programs in the Big Ten to step up and be as committed and consistent as Ohio State's been. And the funniest part about this conversation is Ohio State hasn't won a national title for a decade. So like Michigan is the flag carrier here. So what we get out of Penn State, Michigan, USC, and Washington and Oregon is crucial to the way that we view it, because I don't think that the gap is big between the two, but I do agree with you that it's deeper, because when you start getting into
what the Big Ten needs is Wisconsin. Yeah, they need Wisconsin to be like Tennessee, or they need to spend like Tennessee, which is what I thought was going to happen when Luke Fickell took the job, because I didn't think he was going to take a job like that unless they had that commitment. But we'll see, because like Wisconsin plays Alabama next week. We'll see exactly how far apart they are, and so I am curious about that, but I do think at the top,
though, eventually on the show, like just like Georgia and Ohio State, Alabama, Michigan, and then like go down the list and see how. Like I haven't done that yet. That's an important exercise.
Yeah, and I think what happens is you get into like, Ole Miss, Missouri, Tennessee, LSU, and that's where the SEC sort of starts to distance itself. But I think at the very top, it's very similar.
And you could actually make the case that LSU is the second best team in the Big Ten. Like when you go look at like who in the Big Ten would you
I would
take
not make that
LSU?
case this year.
No, I'm not saying on the field. I mean program wise. Like there's a difference between rankings of the actual season that we're in and program rankings, which is what we should do it On3 too. After every year, we should do program rankings. But like LSU,
don't give them ideas.
Like, are you? Oh no, I'm just giving it away. But I really, really like that. Actually, I think that's Bill Landis' original idea, so it's stolen by proxy. LSU is a program. Like you're not buying Penn State over their program, right? You're not buying Wisconsin over that program. You might not even be buying Michigan over that program. Michigan, I know, just won the national championship, but LSU wasn't that far removed from one either.
LSU is 3 this century.
If LSU is 5 or 6 in the SEC, they might be number 2 in the Big Ten. Now, Oregon and USC and Michigan and Penn State, like there's a lot of potential there, but like based on what the program is. And I'm a Big Ten dude. I lived in Big Ten country for a third of my life. Like I'm not like, I think you're the SEC guy. I'm the Big Ten guy. But I do think that from top to bottom, if LSU is 5 right now, that's a pretty scary proposition for what the SEC brings to the table.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the fact that it's getting more fun, but Michigan in the middle not Michigan. The Big Ten in the middle needs to act like the SEC middle does. And then we can have this conversation. All right. Next one comes from Tay, who apparently learned nothing last week. If Samford beats Florida, I will drink a bottle of my own urine. Did we learn nothing from @321 Noel, who promised to eat dog poop if Boston College beat Florida State, and then Boston College beat Florida State, and he deleted all of his social media? He did reactivate his Twitter account to say, y'all, I'm not eating dog poop. Which, coward. But Tay, I mean, like, I get it. It's sterile and you like the taste. But the last time Samford came to Florida Field, they dropped a 50 burger on the Gators. That was Dan Mullen's penultimate game. Florida won, I think, 70-52 or something like that. And it was kind of a track meet for a while. I don't think this Samford team, which lost to West Georgia, which was playing its first Division I game last week, I don't think this Samford team, but you're going to see DJ Lagway in his first collegiate start. So there you go. Florida better not lose this game. I think Florida will change coaches if they lose this game. I feel safe saying that. I don't know if Tay will drink pee, but I am sure that Florida would change coaches if they lost this game.
I think Tay also went the easier route because, like, if I don't want to play the would you rather game right here, but I think that drinking your own pee would be easier than excrement from an animal.
Probably.
If
he didn't say it was out of red
choose your own
cup.
adventure. But I think we should get this guy's information and address. You know, if you want to make the guarantee, then we'll be about it. Like we'll find you. You can't just delete your Twitter and run off into the abyss of the internet. Like you know what? I'm going to try to find out who this guy is and where he lives.
Well, and I mean, not every Florida fan lives in Florida, but
yeah,
most of them do. So I probably live somewhat close to him. I could probably just knock on it. Tay, I've got a specimen jar right here for you.
Yeah,
it's time to pay up. All the Florida fans like, please God, because now they never would have imagined a loss to Samford, and also because it's Samford and what happened the last time. Like, but they never would have imagined that before the Miami game, and now after the Miami game, like everything's on the table for Florida fans. They're like, there's no depth at this point that's too low in their minds. So
I don't think that if I were a Florida fan, I would bet something that high as stakes on this. I think that Florida is going to win. I'd be very surprised if they didn't, but there's also like checkout alert here too. Like
don't bet your house. Don't threaten to drink bodily fluids.
Especially where there's nothing to gain. Like, that's the thing I don't understand. You're only like putting up some terrible penalty, but you don't have anything to gain for it.
I mean, this is like one of the stupid bets we would do on the show. By the way, chat, have you come up with a bet for us yet? We're not. There will be no human waste involved in our bet. So I can let me put that in your minds right now. But come up with a bet for us. All right, let's move on to this question from Mark. To be upfront, I am from Cincinnati, so obviously I am an Ohio State hater. But my question is, what would it take for Ohio State to have a drop-off to mediocrity for a period like other Blue Bloods have? Every Blue Blood has gone through it, but Ohio State somehow hasn't, and I need it to happen. Okay, this is a great one, Ari, because you did cover that program for 10 years. And I've always said they're the most recession-proof program in college football. Oklahoma is the other one that's close, but Oklahoma did have that down period in the mid to late 90s. Ohio State really has never had one.
Yeah, in 2016, when I was beat writing with Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis, we did a series called Indestructible, meaning Ohio State could be potentially immune from the prolonged down periods that you've seen every other Blue Blood go through. And I think the main reason for that is, first of all, they have a very unique recruiting advantage in that they have a pretty deep talent state all to themselves. And I know that Cincinnati is a P5 team now, and there's a bunch of MAC teams in there. But if there's a top 100 player in Ohio, I think you could count on one hand, how many times Ohio State lost a player with an Ohio State offer from the state of Ohio during the Urban Meyer era. And it happened very infrequently during the Jim Tressel era. If a player is in Ohio and they're good enough to play at Ohio State, they're going to Ohio State. And that's part of the reason why LSU has been so good over the years too, because they've got a similar advantage of being the only Power 5 team in their state. But there are 4 ways that I think that it could happen. And I asked Mark D'Antonio in 2016 at Big Ten Media Days what it would look like for Ohio State to lose 6 games 3 years in a row. And the guy like laughed at me. Like, it was just like he cackled in my face. Like, that's how ridiculous at the time it was. But here are the 4 different ways that we outlined it in the story. And then I think we wrote 4 different stories about these things. But one, NCAA sanctions. And serious ones, ones that reduce scholarship limits and postseason play,
which will never happen again. So you can eliminate that one.
But they did
because the NCAA is not giving those out anymore.
And they did have a losing season in 2011 as a result of that. So again, this story was written in 2016.
Should have never played in that Gator Bowl. Could have been 500.
Yeah. 2016, so take it with a grain of salt. I was written almost 10 years ago now. The second thing was bad recruiting, hiring a coach or putting yourself in a position where you start recruiting number 15, 14, 16, 20, and then injuries happen, transfers happen, and things go wrong. That can't happen. So the other byproduct of that would be 3, which is other programs invading your territory in the recruiting space. So like if Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, and Michigan all decided Ohio was a prime territory for them and they started taking away the layup talents that Ohio State gets to add to their roster every year, that would be a problem. And the thing that you have to consider about the layup talents that Ohio State gets is in recruiting, time is a currency. So if Ohio State has a 5-star quarterback like they do from the state of Ohio committed in next year's class in Tavian St. Clair already, think about the amount of time Ohio State has saved and how much they would have spent trying to get a 5-star quarterback from somewhere else during that same period of time. So not only do you get the player, you also get to bank the time and the currency that you would be spending on recruiting somebody in that position to bolster your roster in other places. So if anybody, I think that would be my number one thing of like, if all of a sudden Ohio State the state of Ohio, for whatever reason, was no longer the layup for their talent accumulation. And then of course, number 3 would be bad hires. And this is kind of interesting because I'm nowhere near the fire Ryan Day camp. Now, if they lose to Michigan this year, that would be a completely different discussion because you can't lose.
Is it that's just more like take another high-paying job where they'll appreciate you, Ryan Day camp, if they lose Michigan, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that if Ohio State were put into a position going into next year where they needed to find a new head coach for whatever reason, that could mean Ryan Day
Because
taking
the NFL,
Patriots job. Like
Yeah.
I'm not saying fired.
Yeah.
And then they go hire somebody that thought about recruiting like Dan Mullen, then I think that there is a chance that I still think Ohio State would recruit really well because of that inherent advantage. But you've had very recruiting oriented type people in the building. And I think Ohio State's NIL fund has clearly spoken for itself in terms of what they're willing to do. And maybe recruiting is not as important as it was 5 years ago anymore, because you can still go get, Quinshon Judkins in the portal if you don't have a running back. But I do think that you still have to have a certain air about you when it comes to recruiting, because Ohio State's been too talented to ever lose 6 games, because the schedule that they played featured 10 games that were 20-point underdogs. Now, I'm going to add a new one that wasn't on that list because that was a 2016 scenario. The new Big Ten is tricky. Losing 6 games in the new Big Ten is a hell of a lot easier than it was 5 years ago. So, you have to be like, if USC gets really good and Oregon gets really good, Michigan stays what they are, Penn State gets better, like Ohio State has to be on their A game, or losing 2 games or 3 games and having down years is probably more possible.
Because then you're like a Nebraska or Wisconsin having a good year away from it being just murderer's row.
Yeah. And they've never had a schedule where they had more than 3 teams that could physically beat them, even on down years. So like now they can probably play schedules where there's 5 or 6 teams that you could lose to if you played poorly. And that changes the calculus a little bit of like that never having a below 500 year for more than 2 or 3 years at a time for the last 100 years.
All right, let us go to this question from @Jazzman279. I find this so fascinating. Dear Andy, rate the heat level of this take. USC has upgraded their QB position this year. He's not more talented, but he's an upgrade. This is Miller Moss over Heisman Trophy winner Caleb Williams. And here's the thing. This is not molten lava. This is not as crazy of a take as you probably think. This is probably Wendy's Saucy Nuggs Spicy Ghost Pepper. Like, it's hot, but it's hot for a general audience. It's not going to melt you. Chase Daniel, the former Missouri star, longtime NFL backup, actually made this point the other day on Twitter too, and everybody went nuts. I'm never taking Miller Moss over Caleb Williams if you give me a chance to draft them. But here's what I will say. Miller Moss not being able to do some of the things that Caleb Williams is physically capable of forces him to operate within the strict confines of Lincoln Riley's offense, and he gets the ball out exactly when Lincoln Riley wants him to. And that produces a pretty effective offense, at least through 2 starts.
I'm
not going any farther than that.
I'm not playing this game with you.
Come on.
I'll play the game with you. It's a podcast. You're my buddy. If Caleb Williams was the quarterback on Saturday, they would have smoked LSU. What are we talking about? What are we doing? Like, are we really doing this? Caleb Williams is the most dynamic, exciting. They're saying he's too good to be good. Like, is that the argument? Is that what we're doing right now?
I knew I could get you there. I knew I could get you there. I knew it.
Lava? That's molten lava. That's nonsense. Like, I understand the thought process of, like, he is so good that he doesn't have to stay within the confines of the play call. But it's like, you think that USC's offense is going to be more functional this year than the one that lit up scoreboards every single week the last 2 years? Their offense wasn't the problem. Their offense was awesome.
But they didn't, like, they were terrible against Notre Dame. And Caleb Williams was terrible against Notre Dame.
I know. And I'm not saying that if you think Miller Moss is going to throw 4 touchdown passes a game for all season, then we'll have this discussion at the end of the year. I don't think there's anything that you could say to convince me of this.
No, I think you're right. But, there have been situations where, and it's Caleb Williams is the wrong person to have this discussion about because he's an otherworldly talent. And I think the problem for Caleb Williams last year was USC's talent on offense was not as good as it needed to be. And I think they're better now. Like the guys that were young guys last year who didn't quite know what they were doing, now they know what they're doing. That's going to benefit Miller Moss. But Caleb Williams, the first year, had Jordan Addison, who is a very nice, reliable target, who was also a very high NFL draft pick. Like, I think that's more the issue there.
But they also were a half a football away from you giving me $1,000 too. So like even when he had Jordan Addison, they were on the precipice of making the 14 field, so it worked. Like I would like to hear or see what Caleb Williams looked like with this set of skill. And I know a lot of these guys were on the team last year, but like I've got a feeling that we're on the verge of seeing Deuce Robinson arrive in a way that he hadn't arrived yet. Zach Branch arrive in a way that he hasn't arrived yet. Like there is nothing that anybody could ever say to make me think USC is a better football team this year because they've got Miller Moss instead of Caleb Williams. Like I understand the thought process of trying to get there. And I'm not saying that USC can't even make the playoff or be very good this year. But to go as like in sports, it's always this person's better than the last person. And it's like sometimes y'all play the game, not playing it with Caleb Williams. Anybody, we're not playing it with Caleb Williams.
There have been situations in the past, like when Kyle Trask replaced Felipe Franks at Florida. Kyle Trask, from a metric standpoint, from a measurable standpoint, not as talented as Felipe Franks. But he was so much better at processing and getting the ball out on time. He was a much better quarterback for them. But Felipe Franks is not anywhere near the same universe as Caleb Williams. Like, I will take Caleb Williams every time over almost every other quarterback who's ever existed. So that one is not. But that's why it's Wendy's Saucy Nuggs Spicy Ghost Pepper hot. It's very hot. But I can see where you're going with it. I can see where you're going with it. All right, one more from Georgia Fan. Let me see what this person did there. Which college football head coach looks more like a grown-up Ralphie from A Christmas Story? Is it Texas A&M's Mike Elko or LSU's Brian Kelly? For those of you who are not watching now, you're not seeing the photos that this person put up, but it is Ralphie from the video box of A Christmas Story.
You put it back up.
Screenshots of Elko and Brian Kelly from their most recent games. So Elko, because he's wearing the glasses, I mean, it is like if you put the horn rim Ralphie glasses on Elko, absolutely. He is like, give him a Red Ryder BB gun right now. I need to see Brian Kelly in glasses because I actually have a feeling if you put the glasses on Brian Kelly, it's even closer of a resemblance.
That is really funny. I didn't see that before, and that was a genuine reaction. Like
I did not send it to you on purpose.
Elko looks just like him in that picture.
It's unbelievable. Do you think Elko used the queen mother of all bad words at any point on Saturday? I think he did it a lot, probably.
Oh man, that's so funny.
Only I didn't say fudge.
I gotta level with you here, pal, and I don't know if this is gonna start off the season on a bad take. I've never seen that movie.
Ari Wasserman has never seen A Christmas Story. That really doesn't shock me, Ari.
Movie. I've seen every other Christmas movie. I've just never gotten around to seeing that one. I mean, I love Christmas movies. You don't have to be. I mean, you could be in the tribe and enjoy the Christmas spirit.
December, we're gonna do a random ranking of Ari's favorite Christmas movies. I am dying.
I'll tell you, I'm gonna give you number one right now. Jingle All the Way.
Oh my god.
That's a hot take, like always, but that movie is
the Miller Moss is a better quarterback than Caleb Williams.
That movie is phenomenal.
Movie takes.
It's an incredible movie. I mean, think about it. You got Sinbad and Arnold in it, man. Come on. Who told you could eat my cookies?
I had no idea we'd be going here today. No clue whatsoever. But good Lord have mercy. That's where we end it right there. That's where we end it today. Ari, when next we speak, you'll be picking me up from the airport. We'll be headed to the big house to watch the Longhorns and the Wolverines. And when next we see you, beautiful people, probably be right after that game, but also 11:30 p.m. Eastern time, post-game show. We break all of Saturday's action down. Texas, Michigan, South Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee, NC State, Nebraska, Colorado. Oh, it's going to be beautiful.
Put that cookie down now.